In the dawn of time, as humanity began its swift proliferation across the nascent earth, a profound silence reigned. The days stretched long and unspoiled, the planet still echoing with the vibrant pulse of creation. Nature flourished in unrestrained beauty. Yet even then, a creeping shadow began to root itself within the human heart, the first tendrils of wickedness. There was an era before the Great Judgment, a span whispered in hushed tones, largely forgotten, but casting a fearsome shadow over creation itself. In the time of Jared, ancestor to Noah, a strange and terrible event transpired in the heavens above. For it came to pass that as the sons of men multiplied and daughters graced the earth with their presence, celestial eyes turned downward, eyes that held power and ancient secrets. The sons of God, known also as the Watchers, mighty angels originally tasked with the solemn duty of guarding humanity, gazed upon the daughters of the earth, and they saw beauty there, a beauty that kindled a forbidden desire within them. Their leader, Samyaza, gathered the others on a plain near Mount Hermon. 200 in all, they stood, contemplating an act fraught with consequence. Fear gnawed at them, for they understood the weight of eternal repercussions. Hesitantly, Samyaza voiced his dread, fearing he alone would bear the crushing blame. But the others, bound by their shared lust, responded with a terrifying unity, sealing their fate. Let us all swear and curse ourselves with a mutual oath, so that we do not turn back. And so they descended. The very ground convulsed as their celestial forms touched the earth. Men watched in stunned awe, for these beings were radiant, distinct from frail mortals. Swiftly, the Watchers took wives, sharing with them secrets previously known only in the highest heavens. From these unholy unions, children were born. But they were not merely men. They were creatures of colossal stature and terrifying strength, giants, beasts of flesh and spirit, known to the ages as the Nephilim. In those days, giants walked the earth, and afterward too, when the sons of God came to the daughters of men and bore children by them. These were the mighty men of old, the men of renown. The hunger of these giants was boundless. Initially, they hunted and consumed the fruits of the earth, but their insatiable appetites soon turned them upon humanity, and then even upon the animals themselves. Deformed creatures, grotesque mixtures of species, began to roam the corrupted landscape. The Watchers, having broken their sacred trust, began to teach forbidden knowledge. Azael, a leader among them, revealed to men the crafts of warfare and vanity, how to forge swords, shields, mirrors, jewelry, and paints to defile the face. Women were instructed in the arts of seduction, enchantment, and adornment to ensnare hearts. Other fallen angels shared the secrets of astronomy, astrology, magic, and the use of herbs for sorcery. The earth itself became contaminated, poisoned by celestial wickedness. And God saw. A solemn decree issued forth from the divine throne. His spirit would not contend with man forever, for man was flesh, bound to mortality. His days would be numbered, limited to 120 years. In the heavens, a judgmental silence fell upon the faithful angels. The gates of paradise closed to the earth, and the archangels were alerted. The Watchers had shattered the cosmic order. On earth, men began to recoil in fear from the creations of the angels. The Nephilim asserted their dominance, becoming lords over tribes, gods among terrified mortals. Their voices roared like thunder, and the mountains trembled beneath their colossal feet. Blood flowed in crimson rivers, and corruption spread like a wildfire fanned by demonic winds. Nature itself cried out in anguish. The skies darkened, birds abandoned their migratory paths. The ground exhaled a bitter, unnatural odor. Creation seemed to recognize a profound, fatal spiritual wound had been inflicted. Then, amidst the rising tide of depravity, God sent a message to a single man, one who walked with the divine, who refused to bow before giants or fallen angels. A prophet largely forgotten by the world, yet known intimately in the courts of heaven. His name was Enoch. He emerged from the silence amidst cities now dominated by the Nephilim, his voice ringing with divine authority. "You sons of heaven have abandoned the highest realms," he declared, "and defiled the earth. The Most High will judge you. The mountains will not conceal your guilt, nor will the abyss shelter you. And a day is coming, a day when the waters will cover everything." The word of Enoch echoed across valleys and mountains, yet few truly listened. Most mocked his warnings, lost in the revelry of corruption or paralyzed by fear of the giants. But in heaven, preparations were underway. The armies of God would be summoned. The watchers would face judgment, for the time of divine patience was swiftly running out. This was only the beginning. The plains that had once teemed with life were now scarred by the deep imprints of colossal feet, and fields laid waste. Where vineyards and olive trees had flourished, now rose cities of stone, erected by the immense strength of the giants. The Nephilim, children of the fallen ones, ruled with an iron fist. Their eyes glowed like embers in the night. Their voices struck terror into human hearts. They were mighty, some possessing a terrible beauty, but consumed by pride, violence, and an insatiable thirst for power. They took whatever they desired: men, women, animals, lands. Wherever they strode, they demanded reverence, for none could stand against their strength. Entire peoples began to worship them as deities. Altars were raised in their honor, sacrifices burned, praises sung to names like Og, Arba, Anak, Gilgamesh. The memory of the Creator began to fade from the lips of men, replaced by hymns to these earthly titans. The Watchers, arrogant in their lineage, permitted the Nephilim to impose their own brutal codes upon the human tribes. War became commonplace. Smaller tribes were enslaved. Violence was celebrated. Brutal tournaments between giants became gruesome festivities, and the very walls of the cities were said to be cemented with human skulls. The skies themselves seemed to weep. Men, steeped in this new, perverse system, began to mimic the cruelty of the giants. Women, taught by Tamil, mastered dark spells. Men wielded bronze weapons and black swords, forged according to Azael's wicked instruction. It was as if the entire world had fallen under a dark enchantment. Yet the signs of divine displeasure were everywhere. The sun appeared weaker, veiled in perpetual haze. The seasons grew erratic. Waters occasionally turned crimson. Cattle sickened inexplicably. Trees withered prematurely. Deformed creatures emerged from the forests. Nature itself cried out in agony, mirroring the profound corruption that had engulfed the earth. And God saw the earth, and behold, it was utterly corrupted, for all flesh had perverted its way upon the earth. In the heavens, the faithful angels watched in somber silence. The throne of the Most High shone with the terrible brilliance of impending justice. There was weeping among the celestial hosts. A judgment was being prepared. But first, there would be one final attempt, one last message of warning. While the Watchers reveled in their stone palaces and the giants engaged in bloody contests across the devastated landscape, a righteous man walked amidst the scorched fields, sowing words upon the wind. Enoch, the seventh from Adam, continued his solitary journey. Crowds avoided him, kings scorned him, but he did not cease to prophesy. In one of his visions, he was taken into the heavens, beholding wonders that no mortal tongue would dare to repeat. Upon his return, he recorded his dire warnings. The mountains will shake, the stars will fall, the heavens will open, and the armies of the Lord will descend in glory. The giants will be judged, and the angels who sired them will be cast into the eternal abyss. But the watchers, though they knew the truth of his words, initially scoffed. Yet fear began to grip their celestial hearts. Desperate, they implored Enoch to intercede for them. They wrote petitions, begging for forgiveness, desiring him to carry their pleas to the Creator. Enoch, with a sorrowful heart, took their writings. He was lifted up again to the heavens, but the judgment had already been sealed. He returned with eyes heavy with tears and a crushing weight upon his spirit. He looked upon the fallen angels and declared, his voice thick with sorrow, "You will not be granted peace. Your children, the Nephilim, will be destroyed before your eyes. You will witness the ruin of everything you have created." Silence fell upon the watchers. For the first time, they truly knew fear. Meanwhile, on earth, the giants continued their frenzied building, erecting ever taller towers, foolishly believing they could reach the heavens. Wisdom had abandoned them. Their bodies grew, but their souls rotted. They turned against each other. Internecine wars erupted among the lineages of giants. Each sought to be the absolute lord of the land. Cities fell in ruin, valleys filled with the blood of titans. Desperate human tribes invoked any entity that promised salvation. Deceptive spirits wandered among men, teaching lies, accelerating the descent into doom. The world was plunging into irreversible chaos, and it was in this landscape of utter depravity that a new character emerged into history. A simple man, not of giant stature, devoid of earthly glory, but with a heart held pure and eyes still turned towards the heavens. His name was Noah. While the Nephilim warred amongst themselves and the cities crumbled under the weight of perversion, Noah walked with God. He was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. His hands worked the soil, but his spirit remained anchored to the divine. Amidst the chaos, he cultivated silence, justice, and faith. The universal corruption had reached such a terrible point that even the animal kingdom was tainted. Monstrous hybrids prowled the hills. The pure lineage of humanity was on the brink of extinction. But God found in Noah the last flicker of fidelity. One night, as Noah slept beneath the shelter of an ancient fig tree, a light descended, like fire that did not consume. The glory of the Lord enveloped him, and he heard a voice resounding with finality. The end of all flesh had come before the Creator, for the earth was filled with violence. Behold, God would destroy them together with the earth. He commanded Noah to build an ark of gopher wood. Noah's face paled, but he did not question. He simply nodded and began the work. Meanwhile, in the heavens, the throne of the Almighty blazed with radiant light. 4 archangels stood before God: Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, and Uriel. Each was given a solemn mission. God's patience had been exhausted. The earth cried out for justice. The souls of the innocent cried out from the dust. It was time for the final judgment. Michael received the order to act against the watchers. Raphael was tasked with capturing Azazel and casting him into an abyss of darkness. Gabriel was sent to incite war among the Nephilim, that they might destroy each other. Uriel would descend to announce the final judgment to the children of the earth. On earth, Enoch was lifted up again into the heavens. He saw the halls of fire, the rivers of light flowing from God's throne. He saw the books opened, the names inscribed, and those that had been erased. A tear traced its path down his ancient face. He returned and delivered the final prophecy to the watchers. There would be no forgiveness. They would be cast into the depths. Their children would perish, and the earth would be cleansed. A new beginning would arise from the destruction. Azazel, the most wicked of the fallen angels, was the first to face judgment. He who had taught men war, idolatry, dishonoring the body, and manipulating creation. Raphael found him in the desolate mountains of Dudael. With chains forged of divine fire, he bound him, dragging him over sharp stones to a dark abyss. There Azazel was cast down, sealed in utter darkness until the great day of judgment. Gabriel, in turn, visited the fortresses of the Nephilim. He sowed distrust and suspicion among them. The giants began to accuse one another. Clans that had once been united became bitter enemies. The wars among the Watchers' own children intensified. It was the beginning of the end for the giants. Michael, the great prince of God's armies, confronted the Watchers who still hid in caves and palaces. They were majestic in form, but now trembled before the presence of the servant of the Most High. One by one, they were chained and cast into deep, lightless caves. And upon these caves, burning stones were piled, sealing their prison until the appointed time. While this cosmic war unfolded in the heavens, Noah continued to build. Day after day, the ark took shape. Its length, 300 cubits, its width, 50, its height, 30. It was a floating fortress, constructed not just of wood, but of faith and sweat. Noah did not question, he simply obeyed. People mocked him. "Where is your God now?" they jeered. "Why such a huge box? Are you planning to sail in the desert?" But Noah offered no reply. He simply continued his work. Then God spoke again to Noah. He and all his family were to enter the ark, for God had found him righteous in that wicked generation. And the animals began to come. 2 by 2, perfect pairs. Birds flew down from the sky. Reptiles crawled. Felines stalked. Oxen lumbered. Deer bounded. All obeying a voice not heard with the ears, but felt in the depths of their being. It was the command of the Creator. The clouds began to gather. The winds shifted with ominous purpose. The angels withdrew their watch. The Watchers were sealed away. The Nephilim locked in internecine war. And then came the 7th day. Noah entered the ark with his wife, his 3 sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives. The door was closed, not by human hands, but by the hand of God. And silence descended, thick and foreboding. Dark clouds formed walls in the skies. Lightning tore the firmament with furious energy. Nature, which had only whispered its protest, now roared its agony. Rivers overflowed their banks. The wind swept across the mountains with terrifying force. Creation, like a mother in the throes of painful labor, writhed and groaned. The time for mercy had ended. Inside the ark, Noah prayed in quiet solitude. The wood creaked and groaned with the first impact of thunder, but the profound peace on his face stood in stark contrast to the panic spreading outside. Outside, men ran, seeking refuge in temples, calling upon their gods of stone. None responded. The door of the ark remained sealed. Then the sound came. A deep, guttural rumble from the very core of the earth. the fountains of the great abyss burst open. On that day, all the springs of the great deep broke forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. Water gushed violently from the depths of the ground, liquid columns erupting through cities. Simultaneously, from the skies, heavy rains fell, not as drops, but as relentless blades of liquid judgment. The Nephilim, proud and arrogant as ever, did not comprehend at first. Some laughed, others grew annoyed. They scrambled up hills, climbed their tallest towers, trusting in their immense strength and stature. But the water showed no respect for height. It rose relentlessly, covering the land. Gilgamesh, one of the greatest among the giants, roared against the sky. "O you who are in the heights," he cried, his voice swallowed by the tempest. "Is this your revenge? Your punishment for us having loved?" But the sky gave no reply, only the depth of Og, the colossus of the eastern mountains, attempted to swim, his massive arms cutting through the churning waters like paddles. But even he, with all his stature, found no solid ground. A monstrous whirlpool swallowed him whole. The screams were terrifying. Humans shrieked in despair. The Nephilim roared in futile rage. The Watchers, chained in the depths, heard the sounds of the destruction they had wrought. In his dark prison, Azael howled. His eyes, once full of pride, were now blinded by the darkness. The silence of the abyss was broken only by the groans of the fallen angels, feeling the full, crushing weight of their rebellion. Inside the ark, Noah felt the violent impacts of the waves against the hull, but his faith remained firm. God himself was sailing with him. The rain continued for 40 days and 40 nights. The highest mountains were covered. No flesh survived the deluge, but the heavens recorded every detail in the celestial books. The names of the Nephilim were erased, scorched by divine fire. Heaven celebrated justice. The stars shone once again with their pure intensity. The cosmic scale had been balanced. In the submerged world, all was silence. The earth had been washed clean, cleansed with the tears of judgment. The ark floated over the vast, watery abyss. The waters covered everything. It was as if the earth itself had been forgotten. But God remembered Noah. The days passed. The wind began to blow, and the waters slowly started to recede. At last, the ark came to rest upon the mountains of Ararat. Noah released a raven, then a dove. The time of waiting was nearing its end. From the window of the ark, Noah looked out upon a transformed world. Nothing remained of the empires of the Nephilim. No tower, no altar, no statue. The very memory of the giants would be buried in the mud of history. But in the spiritual realms, something still stirred. Not all the echoes of the giants had been silenced. In obscure regions, remnants of the corrupted seed awaited a new opportunity. The earth would bloom again, but the shadows, they still lurked. The ground was still damp when the ark finally settled. The waters had receded, revealing a bare, desolate world, devoid of cities, of cries of perversion, of corrupted altars. Noah opened the hatch and saw the clear horizon, as if creation had been reborn after a painful birth. The first act upon touching the ground was to build an altar, not of gold or idols, but of simple stones and grateful hearts. There, he burned offerings of pure animals, and the aroma rose to the sky like the incense of reconciliation. And the Lord smelled the pleasant fragrance and declared in his heart, that he would never again curse the earth because of man, for the imagination of man's heart was evil from his youth. God then sealed a new covenant, a promise for the ages. The sky adorned itself with colors never seen before, an arch touching both clouds and mountains. It was more than refracted light. It was an eternal reminder. "I will place my bow in the cloud," God proclaimed, "and it will be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth." Noah and his sons began the task of reclaiming the land. Ham, Shem, and Japheth learned to cultivate, build shelters, and tend the animals. Generations were born and multiplied. Entire peoples emerged from the sons of Noah. Languages diversified, lands were distributed. The earth continued, now under the sign of the divine promise. But in the silence of the newly reborn land, echoes of the past still whispered. Among the descendants of Ham, ancient stories began to circulate. Legends of men of immense stature, tales of creatures possessing terrifying strength, who had somehow survived the great destruction, or perhaps returned through a tainted heritage. The scriptures offer no easy explanation, but they emerged again. Not with the same titanic splendor of the Nephilim, but still impressive, still threatening. Peoples known as the Anakim, the Rephaim, the Amim, the Zuzim, began to occupy territories. Their bodies were larger, their shouts deeper, their swords heavy as tree trunks. The lineage of the Nephilim seemed to have left traces, seeds mixed among men. Stories spread through the generations like wildfire. In Bashan, it was said, slept a king on an iron bed 9 cubits long. In the land of Canaan lived the children of Enoch, reputed to be descendants of the ancient giants. Their fortified cities were so vast, they seemed to scrape the sky. The reports arrived like rumors, but they repeated with frightening precision. The names changed, but the fear remained the same. The echoes of rebellion had returned to haunt the descendants of the righteous. God, however, had set apart a people who would descend from Abram, a son of Shem, a people who would march through the promised land and face the giants of the past once more. But that was for future days. For now, Noah's sons were spreading forth. The sons of Ham journeyed south to Egypt, Canaan, and Nimrod. The sons of Japheth multiplied in the northern lands, and Shem preserved among his descendants the lineage of the promise, a line that would be guarded for centuries until the coming of the Messiah. Even so, the giants would rise again. One night, Noah stood gazing at the sky, his face now lined with age but still holding a profound serenity. Beside him stood Shem, carrying a cup of wine. His father looked at the distant stars and spoke, his voice a low rumble. "They are back." Shem looked at him, confused. "No, you don't understand," Noah corrected gently. "Who, my father?" "The great ones," Noah replied, his gaze fixed on the constellations. "In smaller flesh, but with the same spirit. The earth still moans." Noah rose slowly, pointing towards the star-filled expanse. "But the promise is there," he said, his voice firm. "The rainbow. As long as it shines, there is still hope, even when the darkness returns." And with that, he withdrew to his tent. Noah's days would end shortly after, but his legacy would endure. The memory of the flood would cross continents. Distant peoples would tell similar stories, from the Andes to the Himalayas, from the Hebrews to the Babylonians. All would speak of a great flood and of giant beings who preceded the destruction. Noah died at the age of 950 years, buried among the mountains, far from the future lands of battle. His children continued the story, and the giants, though weakened, continued to roam the territories. They were like shadows without substance, ancient whispers, ghosts of the Watcher's grave mistake. But one day, men would rise with courage. Men who would face the giants, not with the brute strength of the Nephilim, but with the unwavering faith of the prophets. And among them, a young shepherd would arise. Time passed like the breath of an ancient wind. Civilizations rose from the ashes left by the flood. Noah's sons multiplied, spreading across the valleys and plains, and with them grew memories and fears. In the land of Canaan, stories circulated among the tribes, whispered in the dark of night. They spoke of men of enormous stature, of insurmountable walls, of cities where the very heavens seemed to rest upon towers of stone. Among the inhabitants of that land were names that bore the weight of ancient curses: Anakites, Rephaim, Emim, Zamzumim, children of the shadows, descendants from forgotten times. It was into this scenario that the people of Israel marched, led by the mighty hand of God, freed from Egypt under the guidance of Moses. They crossed the desert, their eyes fixed on the promised land. But before taking possession, they had to face them. The giants were waiting. When Moses sent 12 spies to examine Canaan, 10 returned with hearts filled with a paralyzing dread. The land was indeed good, they reported, but the men who inhabited it were of great stature. They had seen the sons of Enoch there, descendants of giants, and in their own eyes, the spies had felt like mere grasshoppers. The people wept, consumed by fear. They longed to return to the perceived safety of Egypt. But 2 men rose against the tide of despair: Joshua and Caleb. "Do not fear the people of this land," they declared, their voices ringing with conviction. "For we will devour them like bread. The Lord is with us. Do not fear them." These words of faith echoed like thunder against the prevailing unbelief. The generation steeped in fear would perish in the desert, but their children, the generation who dared to trust, would witness the fall of the giants. And so it was fulfilled. Under Joshua's command, Israel crossed the Jordan. Soon, the confrontation began. Cities like Hebron, Debir, and Anab, strongholds of the Anakim, were taken. The giants fell by the sword of the faithful, but the most feared was yet to come. In the region of Bashan, Og reigned, the last of the Rephaim. His bed was said to be 9 cubits of iron, his body colossal. His very name struck terror into the hearts of kings. But not Joshua. "Do not fear him," the Lord commanded Joshua, "for I have delivered him into your hands." And so, Og fell. Bashan was conquered, the giants' altars destroyed, the shadow of the past torn apart by the light of obedience. Still, it would not be the ultimate end. Among the Philistines, another name would emerge, a name that would echo through the centuries: Goliath, the champion of Gath. A man nearly 3 meters tall, clad in gleaming bronze, arrogance blazing in his eyes. For 40 days, he stood before the valley of Elah, issuing his challenge to Israel. "Choose a man from among you to come against him." If their champion could fight and defeat him, the Philistines would become their servants. But if he defeated their man, Israel would be theirs. Israel was silent, paralyzed by fear. Not even King Saul dared to face the giant. But then, from among the flocks, emerged a young man. Armed only with a staff and 5 smooth stones in his shepherd's bag. His name was David. Small in the eyes of the army, but a giant before God. The battlefield fell silent. On one side stood Goliath, the champion of the Philistines, nearly 3 meters of arrogance clad in bronze and contempt. On the other, a shepherd boy without armor, armed only with faith. "Am I a dog?" the giant bellowed, spitting on the ground. "That you come to me with sticks?" Goliath mocked, his voice filled with scorn. But David did not retreat. His eyes did not see the armor nor the size. His eyes saw the outrage against the Holy One of Israel. "You come to me with a sword, and with a spear, and with a shield," David declared, his voice clear and unwavering. "But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." The sky seemed to hold its breath. Even the angels fell silent, and the stone flew. A short, sharp whistle cutting through the air, a dry, impacting sound. Goliath fell. He fell like a tree rotted by pride, face down upon the ground. The ancient terror crumbled before the power of faith. David ran to him, took the giant's own sword, and with a single blow severed his head. The ground trembled. The Philistine army fled in panic. The fear that men had felt for the giants now turned violently against the giants themselves. But that was not the absolute conclusion. It was only the beginning of the final hunt. David would become king, a shepherd crowned with courage. And under his reign, the last generation of giants would fall. First came Ishbi-Benob, who attempted to kill David in battle, wielding a spear whose head weighed 300 shekels of bronze. But he was struck down by Abishai, son of Zeruiah. Then came Saph, another descendant of the Rephaim. He was killed by Sibbecai the Hushathite in another battle. Next was Lami, brother of Goliath of Gath, who carried a spear with a shaft like a weaver's beam. He was defeated by Elhanan son of Jare-Oregim. And finally, an anonymous giant, described as having 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in total, a monstrous figure in the eyes of men, but who fell just like the others. David was no longer the boy from the valley, but faith still guided him. And wherever he marched, the lineage of the giants fell, as if the very heavens were closing a cycle begun in the days of Noah. The warriors who slew the last of the Rephaim were not titans, nor sons of angels. They were ordinary men, but each carried something the giants never knew: the presence of the living God. And so, stone by stone, sword by sword, the profane lineage of the Nephilim, fragmented since the flood, was systematically eliminated. The cities of the giants crumbled. Their names became a warning, their deeds an even greater warning, and their souls, disembodied spirits, continued to wander, already defeated, merely awaiting the final judgment. And in the hearts of the faithful, a certainty echoed across the ages. It is not strength that defeats giants. It is faith.